Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first official episode of what we're calling the Svelte Way. Uh, I'm Russell Goldenberg, and I'm here with Amelia.
Hi, I'm Amelia Wattenberger.
Great introduction. I guess we're both engineers at the Pudding, and today we are going to be embarking on our, I guess, semi-regular video series where we talk about all things Svelte. I guess it'll be a mix of discussion and coding. I guess we should talk about why we're doing this. We've both been using Svelte pretty heavily over the past year. Have you been using it a little longer, Amelia? I feel like you have.
Probably a year now.
Okay. Well, it feels like forever. And I think one of the best parts about Svelte is that it's very flexible from a developer's viewpoint. And however, I feel like that means there's usually a few different ways to do things. So I think in the series, we're going to be talking about these scenarios that we've come across, about different like implementation decisions and the crossroads that you kind of come up against. And each one will pick a topic. So today we're going to start talking about passing values from a child to a parent component or up the tree, and discuss their pros and cons. I think that's all I got. Anything else you want to preface with?
Yeah, we ran into this. I feel like when we work on internal projects where we're not sharing the code, we kind of just do whatever we're most familiar with. But then we were working on a Svelte crossword component where are we going to open source it. And so we were trying to be a little bit more judicious in how we did things. And there were a few circumstances where there were multiple ways to do something, but it's kind of unclear if there's a Sveltier way or what are the pros and cons of these different ways. So we wanted to talk about these publicly, and also figure out which ones make most sense in different circumstances for ourselves.
Yep, that's about it. We're always debating what's the right way to do it. And pretty much every other day, I'll ping Amelia with a request to look at something. So I guess without further ado, let's jump into it. Let me share my screen. All right. So let's give the little setup. We talked about the premise is looking at passing stuff from child to the parent or even up further in the component tree. So we're going to use this little use case of an input field and passing that value up. So there's a whole slew of ways to actually do this in Svelte. I think we counted like 5 different approaches.
Yep.
We're going to talk about the 3 kind of core ones that make the most sense to us and maybe why some would be better than others. So let's start with the first one, which is probably the simplest.
So a little background for like what we're looking at. So this top file is like the root for our dummy application. It's just an input field or an instance of the input component, and then we're saying the result. And then at the bottom, it's our input component, which is just displaying an input field with a lovely placeholder. So in this example, our input is our child, and we want to pass something up to the root, which is the parent.
Yep. So I'll let you do the honors of showing the two-way binding in action. So right now we've got nothing in our input script, but
all right. So our prompt here is we want to pass up the value of the input up to our root component. And so if we were to grab that for the input field on the bottom, we would probably do a bind value to that input element on line 5. And we would also create a variable within the script.
I'm going to go ahead and just type it out while you talk it out. How's that sound?
It's perfect.
Actually, let's see if we can go one step.
So in Svelte, we're able to use bind to do kind of a 2-way binding. So anytime we change the input, it's bound to the variable value. And so we can just render it below in a paragraph to demonstrate that. So as Russell types in the input, it changes the value of our value variable, and pretty easy. So one of the ways we can pass that value up to the parent is by adding it as a prop. Maybe that's React syntax.
No,
I
no,
don't know
it's a
what they're
prop.
called. Okay, so it's a prop of the component input. And so when we create an instance of this input component, we can pass a value for different properties by saying like value equals value. So we already have value in our root component. So here, if we did value equals and then value in this semi in the curlies, then we're grabbing the value, we're passing down the value of value from the root to the input.
Yes.
And we can shorthand it as just value in the curlies. And if we, so this way, root is sending down value to the input, so we can pass it down the tree this way. But if we wanted to also pass it up the tree, we could use bind and then semicolon value to do that kind of two-way binding. So anytime value changes in the parent, it also changes in the child, and anytime it changes in the child, it also changes in the parent. So this isn't strictly passing up the tree. It's kind of like syncing between nodes in the tree. But this is the easiest way to have a child change a variable that is also in the parent.
Yep. So maybe we should have done a better job and not use value for the same variable each place. But so let's pretend it's name. We could have said bind value equals name.
And then you'll need upper to change as well.
Of course. Okay. So that's maybe a little clearer that this value is not a special word here. It's just whatever we wanted to. It doesn't always have to be value as a variable name. Yep. Okay, I feel like that. So this one's awesome. It's super, to me, it's very clear what is happening in the parent component. It's also very succinct, which is nice, especially if we don't do it this way and you can just shorthand it, right? So bind value and then you're done with it. So that's really great. I've come across a use case where I want to use this brevity, but I don't want that two-way street. And so I guess just wanted to show a quick little hack that kind of protects the child from any incoming changes from the parent in case that's not something you want. So what I've done before is I'll keep a local, or like kind of a locally scoped variable. So let's call it local. And so I'll bind this value in the input to that one. And then that way, if I can still use this binding, and then whenever local changes, I can set the two-way bound value to that. So even if someone changes value from the parent, that won't affect what's happening in this input state. That didn't work, but it's supposed to. It should have worked. Maybe when local changes, value equals local. I don't think that's necessary, but. Okay, well.
Is there an error in the console?
I was trying to not do this, but I was trying to do this without opening the console. That was just a terrible plan. Let's bring this up a little higher. Name is undefined.
That's a lie. We try refreshing.
Yeah. That is very interesting. This was maybe I'm learning something. Maybe this was only working because of that. Like I know this works. Famous last words.
We might need to. Okay, root does not have a line 159. Maybe let's try restarting the server.
I just did.
Oh.
And this is what happens when you try using SpellKit before it's ready without knowing what's going on. Okay, well, I guess this will still be linked. We're going to link to the code base and maybe a REPL, so you'll be able to play with this working on your own. For now, I think you just have to trust that it's going to work. And
wait, click that first. Click like the root Svelte link in the error message. Yeah.
Is that helpful to you?
No.
Oh, is there maybe some caching happening that I'm not aware of?
It feels like it. Can you do a hard refresh?
I have been.
First. And then
where is the disable
scroll
caching?
Down. Is there something more in root? Let me look. No.
What you see is what you get right here.
Yeah.
I have to imagine it's a caching thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's no name in here anymore. Try undoing an input.
No, cache is disabled though, so.
I think as long as there's an error, it's not going to change anything. Oh, value is undefined. Here's something new. Okay, yeah. No.
Value. Let's go back to our initial state that was working before I decided to blow it all up.
This is what you get.
Okay, we're back.
Maybe we could just cut that part.
No, this is all going in there. Let's see if this now works. I'm not confident anymore, but
really brought you down a notch.
Oh, okay, it's still working. So back to where we were. This is a way to protect that local scope. So even if someone changed it up here, it wouldn't propagate down to like the input field. Moving on. So
this is a way to make it not a two-way binding. Essentially, it's just a one-way binding going up the tree, which can be really nice because sometimes two-way bindings can be a little bit too magic, and it can be confusing who's changing what.
Exactly. Okay, so I guess we promised a few other versions, so let's show those. The next, which is, I think Amelia said, is something that comes from React land. Do you want to intro the next one?
In React, one of the central tenets is the one-way data flow. So you don't get this kind of two-way binding. So typically, if you want to pass something up, you could use a callback property. So instead of bind value, we could do on change as a property, and then when it changed, we pass back the value as the first parameter. So new value, and then you would do value equals new value. And then within input, we would have export let on change. That would be the property. And then locally, we would have to create value, the variable. Yeah, and then anytime value changed, we would call on change with the value of value.
Yeah, and we could do this a few ways. I'm going to try doing it using the reactive statement again. All right, let's. Oh, on change value.
Is there an error?
Yeah, probably.
You could open it in a different window.
Oh yeah, value is undefined. That's really nice.
Okay, right, because we've declared it statically, and then it should be
Oh, there we go.
Okay, cool. I
Oh,
think
interesting.
sometimes input, I've seen errors where like the initial value wasn't a string.
That must have been what happened when I tried to do it previously. I think we've
Yeah,
solved it.
maybe.
Okay, so
Uh-huh.
this is working again on change.
So this is a way you typically see more in React, but it works really well. I wouldn't use it to bind to the value of an input. I think the two-way bind for input is really nice. So here we can switch it back to bind value. One thing that would make more sense for an input is if we had a form and we wanted to say validate the form on Blur. So when the user clicked out or tabbed out of the input, we could add. Oh no.
Export that value. I'm sorry, I interrupted your train of thought.
No, this is I'm on the edge of my seat.
I'm not. We're not getting it. Oh,
There you go.
okay.
Just needs a few
Something
refreshes.
weird is happening. We're going to keep rolling though.
So one
okay.
use case that might make more sense for a callback function is to do export let on blur. So then you'll have like an on blur callback. So in the parent, we could do like on blur and then like validate form or something.
So we could probably have a little more complexity. So we could have a local, I'm going to call it local, a function in here on blur equals, I believe there would be an event. And we could do a whole bunch of like validation inside of here. And to your point, we could grab the value from the event. It's somewhere in there, or we could, since we already have it with the binds, right? We could just do something with value since we already have it right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to actually trigger that, we can use the on blur input event, and essentially this propagates it up the tree.
Yeah, so that's like a native browser, like on blur event.
All right, so then in here, we can just, we could even actually go, let's maybe not do that. What if we replaced all numbers with dashes? I don't know. That's something you might want to do. Value. This is maybe not the best way to do it. Is this going to be confusing? Probably.
No, let's do it.
Let output equals, and then output equals value dot replace. Oh my God, live objects.
Nice.
And nice.
I'm enjoying this.
Yeah. Okay. You think this is going to work?
I think you should refresh twice.
Twice for good luck. Okay, first. No. Why?
Well, no. This makes sense because output's not updating when value changes. Just so do it and then click out. Yeah.
Okay. It was working. Now let's actually see. This has a 4 in it.
Yes.
Amazing. We have validated our
shift it.
Perfect. So that's great. I feel like there's another way to do this in Svelte, though. What would you think, Amelia?
Oh, there definitely is. So callback functions, they're really nice. But there's something that feels a little bit more native to the browser and a little bit Sveltier, and we can talk about the pros and cons, and that is dispatching an action.
I'll get the boilerplate code set up because if you're dealing in a very small use case like this, it's going to seem like there's a lot of extra stuff going on. But once your files get a little more verbose and I guess slightly more normal in what you would expect in a real application, this isn't too much of a overhead. But basically, you have to create, bring in what's it called, create event dispatcher. dispatcher. You want to import that from
Import, yeah.
from Svelte. And I'm going to do my best and actually save more frequently now so we can see when it doesn't like what we're doing. And then you have to actually create a dispatcher. Create event dispatcher. Okay. So that's a little bit of the boilerplate code you need. But now we can actually do the event in a more, I guess, semantically clear way. So now when we have the onBlur function, I guess, should we do it right in line, or should we can probably just do it in line, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
Get rid of this placeholder altogether just for screen real estate. And then to dispatch an event, you just have to call the dispatch function and you give it a name. So we could name it anything we want because this is a thing we're essentially just propagating up the tree. We can name it blur because that makes sense. But it could be anything. And then you can pass it any value you want. It could be an object. In our case, I guess we don't have to pass it anything, but maybe it makes sense to pass it value.
Let's call it input blur just to be clear.
Ooh. Input blur.
Maybe hyphenate it?
Hyphenize? Oh, we're hyphenizing. Okay. And that should create and dispatch a new event. So it's going to be very similar, but here we'll say, now we can actually utilize how you receive, I guess, an event. Not sure if that's the right terminology, but I've never used a hyphen. That looks fine. So we've created, so the same way that we use the native onBlur, we've created our own native looking event. So on input blur, and let's maybe create a new function just for the sake of it. On input blur. And the difference here is it'll actually pass you an object that, or I guess it's an event. I will very often just
destructure
it, yeah, to get the value inside of it. But technically it's an event. And then
if you log it out, can we see, or is the console blocked?
We can see. Okay, let's make this happen. That looks good, I think. Okay, the old double refresh. Okay, so test. There you go. I tabbed out of it, and you can see everything we get. I'm actually going to bring this up even higher. It creates an event, which is exactly what we're looking for. And it's type input blur, so that makes sense. And like I said, detail has that custom stuff we passed up, which in this case was just the value. But it could be an object. You can pass whatever you want to your heart's desire to make some really custom functions. So that's that. There was one thing, actually, anything else to add on event dispatching?
Yeah, I guess to recap, this is very similar to our previous just callback function method, but it feels a little bit better to have it as an event. And there's also a few reasons events are easier to deal with than callback functions, which Russell is about to talk about. But hopefully this kind of outlines the difference between doing a callback property and dispatching a custom event.
Yep. I think the use case I wanted to go over is passing, like kind of what we talked about, passing a value up the tree. There's event forwarding, which is kind of just really nice baked in. So let's say, let's see if I created this form. Let's pretend root actually had a form element instead of an input element. And we actually wanted this event blur to happen in root, even though input is now in here. let me just kind of move everything over. Okay, so let's say this form has the input, but we actually want the input blur callback function to happen, the event to happen in root. Instead of, I guess if you were doing callback or any other thing, you'd have to create this custom callback for every single layer and pass it up. But you can just do event forwarding, which means instead of doing it here, we can just say on input blur, and that'll essentially forward it on to root. So in root, when we have form, we can say on input blur, and here we can actually handle that input blur event. So it's just really nice because then you don't have to worry about kind of creating new callbacks or something for each level of component that you have nested, but it can just kind of pass that along, which is kind of cool.
Can you have multiple inputs in the form and then show us how that works?
Like this?
Yeah.
Do you want them all to forward events?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Now we're going to have to create multiple values if we're doing this. Actually, I guess we don't even need to bind the value because I think, yeah. Okay. Nice. We've got 3 inputs. We've got 1 input blur. And let's go ahead and let value equals event.detail. I like the live coding challenge. Value.
Exciting.
Dang. So close.
It's not defined in form, I think.
Output. Oh, that's a legacy. Output.
In input, maybe?
Oh, I left that in there. I didn't see it.
It's hiding in there.
Okay, we have 3. We have 3. Let's do a little refresh. Okay. First box. So in theory, when we press tab, it should say first box under value. Amazing.
Oh, man.
I'm going to be really excited if this happens. Oh, look at that. What do you think is going to happen in this one? Yay. Okay. So there it is.
So this would make a lot of sense if you did have a form and you wanted to validate whenever someone was done with an input. So if they press tab in between inputs, you could validate all of the inputs and see if there are any errors and warn them before they get too far down the form.
Yep. So I think those are the big 3. We did have 2 others other ways to pass the values up. I think we didn't want to show them because they're a little, that's not the best use case of them. So the first one, what was the first one, Amelia? Stores?
Can you go to a whiteboard? Is that possible?
Oh, that's risky.
Let's try it.
I guess we might not see anything, but we'll go for it. Okay, we have a whiteboard.
Okay.
Is it screen sharing? I don't know.
Let's just assume everything works. All right, so the first one is contact, or is like a global store. So sometimes in an app, you'll just have a global store. So this, I'm gonna draw like our crossword example. So this top one would be maybe a crossword, and then these sub ones would be cells in the crossword. So with a global store, say this is one crossword application, you could store the cell values in a global store, and then you could like grab them at any place in the app. But it doesn't really make sense for passing an individual value, say from an input up to a form parent, because it's global. So you'll use this for something like For a more complicated app for like user state or user profile stuff, or if it's just a crossword for that crossword state, if you wanted to share it around all of the components.
Yep.
And then the other one that is also an option for, oh no, for passing state up from a child to its parents is context. So with context, you can have the value as a writable if you want its state to change. Say these are both crossword components, these top blue and orange boxes. Context would make a lot of sense for keeping a more global kind of state, but scoped to a specific part of your application. So if you wanted 2 crosswords on your page and you wanted them to have different values when the user's editing the cells, but you wanted to share that value among the crossword and any of its nested components, then you could use context with writables in the context state.
Yeah, and that might sound a little confusing without seeing the code, but we actually are planning on doing another talk where we focus more on passing values down, but maybe with a little bit of a discussion about that back and forth, where we'll explain these different options in more detail. Amazing. Anything, I guess that's it for this one. I'm going to stop screen sharing so nothing else can go wrong. I guess any parting thoughts, Amelia? I guess like, what's your favorite? I mean, you kind of implied that you use certain things in certain situations, but is there any like time you would want to use custom callbacks versus events, or times you avoid two-way bindings?
So I pretty much always use the two-way binding. It's really nice. I've coded a lot in React, and switching to Svelte, it's just makes a lot of sense for like the smaller applications we do at the pudding, just like passing state around. It can be really confusing with the two-way binding. Like I worked with AngularJS before that, and on a large application, and it can get very confusing, like where is this state coming from, who's changing it. But I think with smaller apps, and if you build them intentionally, then it can be really nice. There's also a new Firefox extension that helps you track state changes in your app, which we can share the link to, which is great so far. I haven't used it a lot, but and I think it just came out, so I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it's only in Firefox. It's pending, I guess, in the Chrome store. I think it's called the Svelte Reactivity Debugger. Yeah, I think the only thing I'll end with is I sometimes try to avoid the two-way binding only because in the Svelte docs, it says, be careful about using it. So I've taken that very literally, and I'm always careful about using it. So, but it is pretty awesome. I've never really encountered a situation where it hasn't made my life easier. So, yes. All right. Well, that was episode 1. Way longer than I think we intended.
Yeah, a little bumpy, but I feel like it was useful, at least to me. So that's one happy customer. Also, if you all are confused about anything and you want us to ramble on about it, let us know. We're happy to talk about, anything Svelte.
Just Svelte though. Anything Svelte, and it's on the table. All right. Bye, everybody.